Welcome back again to my YouTube channel. It's so good to have you here. It's been a number of months since I posted a video last, but today this video is going to be a great one. We're going to make another gambler buoy. In March of this year I made a gambler buoy. It had 4 aces inlaid into the handle and a lot of hand engraving on the piece. And in this one we're going to have 5 ivory dice with Sheffield pins. It's going to be a really cool piece. As is the case with a lot of my knives, I like to make a good drawing before, and in this case I made my first watercolor. Basically drew up the knife with a waterproof ink and then filled in with the watercolor paint. And here is the drawing. This is going to be a fun project. So my starting steel is going to be some AEBL stainless. First thing I want to do is I want to surface grind it to the width that I need, which is right around 900 thousandths of an inch. I will apply some layout fluid, which is just going to dye the blade, and then I can make a number of scratches, and the scratches will show up really clearly. Using the height gauge to make sure everything is centered is a really good idea. I'm using the form that I will use for the metal sheath to trace the blade shape. So the scribe really leaves very clear lines on this layout fluid. Looks like we got our nice shape. So we're going to hog some of that material off with the bandsaw. And then we're going to carefully profile grind the shape. If we get it really accurate now, we don't have to change anything later. It's really handy if your grinder can tilt like this. Up next, I use my carbide file guide. This is the Big Mert carbide file guide. It's basically a stainless clamp with carbide faces. And I can clamp this onto the blade at a perfect 90 degrees. These clamps are awesome. They don't wiggle, they don't slide, they don't shift on you. But once it's clamped here, then I will mount it up in my milling machine. Then, using a 3/8 end mill, I mill a little step behind the blade on the tang. And what this will allow me to do is create a very, very flat, straight surface for the guard to meet up on. Then I surface grind the tang thinner. I like the tang to taper from the blade to the very end. Hand filing to make sure that the shoulders are really good and square. And at this point, we're going to surface grind the blade. This surface grinder has an auto feed and has increments of 1/10,000th of an inch. The belt I'm using on here is a A60 Trizact Gator belt. It leaves a very beautiful finish. A little bit of hand sanding, then we can cut the threads on the end of the tang. It is a stainless steel, so I want to cut these threads before the heat treatment. Using a temporary nut, screws on beautifully. There we have our first part ready to go. Now we're going to work on some of the fittings. We're using 4/16 on the guard and spacers. Let's give that a surface grinding before we mill these pieces. 1, 2, 3. Starting first with the guard, using a little 1/8 inch end mill. Making a slot, then we make it wider. It's such a pleasure to use precision tools. As long as your measurements are correct, everything will go together perfectly. Now we're going to tap this guard on there. With just a few taps, the guard will go on to its final position. Now we can repeat this process for the 5 consecutive spacers. With the 5 spacers and guard all attached onto the tang, we're going to clamp them with some Kent twist clamps. These are some small 1-inch clamps, and they are a must-have in your shop. So I have them clamped together here, and then I'm going to drill some alignment pinholes. These are little pins that will go through all the spacers into the guard and give us the ability to put everything together the same way every single time. I had some temporary pins in there, so now we're going to use some of this wire, but it's just too thick. So using a draw plate that I use for my gold and precious metals, I'm actually going to draw this down to a thinner diameter. Now the pins fit just perfectly. We can clip them off. And before we continue, I'm going to laser engrave the numbers. These numbers indicate which position each spacer is in. So it's very easy for the buyer to put it together and take it apart. Having now all the spacers and the guard ready for the handle material. So we're going to look for some nice dark wood, either African blackwood or ebony. My first Gambler Bowie was ebony, so we're going to go for another piece of ebony too. Here I am digging around looking for a block. There we go. And it's the perfect size too. We're going to just clean up the surface just a little. That way when we draw on it, we'll be easily able to see all the pencil lines. We're tracing the tang onto this block. This will give us a good indicator where we need to drill our holes and where the slot needs to be. So using our milling machine again, I'm going to line this up with the square, make sure the lines are all perpendicular and parallel. Drilling now down with a 1/4-inch end mill. This little milling machine has been so handy. There we have the temporarily assembled knife. Doesn't look much like a knife yet. So our next step is we're going to bed the tang. So using some Vaseline, I'm going to coat all these parts in the tang. And then with my C Corp C30 epoxy, it's a 30-minute epoxy, we're going to glue this knife in there. I'm really quite a fan of this epoxy. It mixes nice, it pours nice, does a good job. So now I'm filling up my handle block here with that epoxy. And then I'm going to screw it together. Tighten that screw on the back. It's just a temporary nut in the back. We're going to wait just about 30 minutes. The epoxy is cured, but not very, very hard yet. So we can pull it apart. Get some of the schmutz off. And then we clean out inside the handle using a pipe cleaner. The next morning, when the epoxy is fully cured and hardened, we're going to mount these magnetic transfer blocks on my surface grinder. This is the beauty of having a belt cutting surface grinder, is it can grind metal, but it can also grind wood. So what we're doing here is we're grinding each side of the handle until the handle is centered with the blade. This is a gratifying process. because when you're done here, you know that everything is straight, all the lines are parallel and perpendicular to each other. Up next, I have this handle template that I've been keeping around. I'm going to trace the handle template onto our handle. But before we continue, I want to first counterbore the back end of the handle. This will allow the nut to rest on that little ledge inside the handle. Here, using the end mill to just make that bottom of that hole flat instead of pointed. And we're going to grind the blade. So using my height gauge, I'm going to scribe a center line. At this point, the blade is not hardened yet. As I will be engraving the blade, it needs to be soft for engraving, and we need to basically finish the knife before hardening. This 2x72 grinder has served me very well for just about 5 years now. So starting off first, I'm grinding what I call a pre-bevel. And the pre-bevel is just a 15-degree angle that I grind on the very edge of the blade, just to separate the very edge from the rest of the knife. That way when I grind the flats of the blade, then I won't have to worry about overheating the very edge. Using the waterfall platen here now, we are making our scratches linear. Plus it's nice and flat, so it leaves a really nice finish. I didn't grind all the way down, I'll leave the rest for hand sanding. A reminder that at this point the blade is still not hardened. Hand sanding is a lot of fun. And one evening my wife surprised me by coming to do some hand sanding for me. So I could just sit around and watch. Look at that beautiful finish. Between grits, I like to buff. So if I'm starting with a 400 grit sandpaper, then I like to buff with this buffing wheel, and then I like to move up to the next higher grit. Ratty Dugan made my grinder, and he made this attachment for it too, this buffing attachment, and it is just magnificent. He lives in Brampton, Ontario, Canada. Shiny! So we're just going to clamp it on some leather here, and using some 1200 grit, time to make sure that it's all the way sanded perfectly to 1200 grit. Up next, we're going to do some really American style scroll work. It's a period scroll work engraving. There's a video on YouTube from Knife Magazine showing off a bunch of the Californian knives, and these knives are magnificent. Well, the engraving I'm using is modeled after this particular knife, made in the second half of the 19th century, and it has a silver sheath, and it's so artfully engraved, very tastefully done. I drew up a copy of that engraving and uploaded it to the computer, and using the laser with a very low power function, I am just laying out these lines on the blade. At this point, since I have the laser on anyway, I will be engraving my touch mark. JVB, Jakob van der Bruinhorst, with a little maple leaf. I heated up some hot glue that'll make it nice and sticky, and I'm mounting the blade onto that glue. This will keep it from slipping, and I can easily clamp it in my ball vise. I engrave in the house, so I keep everything dust free, and I have a Lindsay foot control engraver. This is a really nice engraver. Very small 116-degree cutting tip. I am at the moment yet self-taught, but I would love to take a course on how to engrave. first I'm cutting the spines of the scrolls, which are basically the backbone of the scroll. And my microscope is just so nice for this kind of work. The recording is really fast forwarded, so it does take quite a bit longer than it's showing here. There is one side done. It is shaded, and we're going to just hand sand all the little grooves and bumps off. Look how beautiful that is. And afterwards I went and did the left side of the blade. Here it is in progress. So at this point now we can finally heat treat the knife. So I'm cutting some stainless foil here, basically making a little envelope. I was a little bit worried at this point because technically the blade is completely finished and it has to yet be hardened. So things can happen, things can go awry during heat treatment. Here we are, slipping it into the kiln, 1950 degrees Fahrenheit. Taking it out of the kiln and clamping it in these steel plates. That'll keep it straight and cool it. And hopefully we have a perfect hardened knife. And we hope it's straight. The moment of truth. We're taking it out of the packet. Yes.
It's straight.
So here it is after hardening. You can see some of these cool colors on the blade. So we're going to go and temper now. 375 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours twice. The next morning, you can see it snowed a little bit on the ground. Whenever it does, I like to be in the shop and look outside where it's cold and be in the warm shop. So we're tempering back the tang and the shoulders of this knife, and then we're going to do the post-heat treatment hand sanding. This took me quite a while to do. But again, after buffing, we end up with a nice and shiny blade. I use my laser to also outline shapes, like this elliptical on the front of the guard. And this elliptical on the spacers. This gives me a good, clear, centered line to grind to. Again, just retracing the profile on this handle. Now we can finally profile the handle. Ebony is such a beautiful dark wood. It's so rich. Make sure we get the profile just perfect. Look at this. Our next step now is going to be inlaying these ivory dice. So let's get a measurement on that. And we'll be using the pantograph to make our dice. My pantograph is set at a 3:1 ratio. So what that basically means is I need to have a template that's 3 times the size of the finished cutout piece. I'm using Trespa plastic for the template, making sure that all the measurements work out perfectly. Needs to be right around 1200, so 1.2 inches. Look at that, not bad for hand grinding. Now the female template, I'm just milling out of a big block, and we're going to clamp this on a silicone mat. It's nice having a T-slot table for this job. Again, we're going to use the C Corp epoxy, epoxy 30. You see the flowers in the background. My wife gave me flowers. She came home from town once and she brought me flowers, which is really cool. I like flowers. Now, using a little bit of floor wax, paste wax, I'm going to just coat the male template, because I don't want the glue to stick to the male template, but I want it to fill in the voids and connect to the female template. Now we can pour in our epoxy. Got a little weight on that male template. Just drizzle that epoxy in there. It is the next morning now, and we can take our template off. We can peel that little mat off of there, and then we'll grind all the excess epoxy off. Look at that, pushes out perfectly. Now we're going to find some ivory. So I'm going to dig around in my drawer, see if I can find some scrap ivory that'll work really well. Got some pieces here. Going to grind them clean to see if they're the right pieces first, though. One piece had some cracks in it, so I discarded that. And this other one is really nice and clean. So we're just cutting out the little squares. And then we're just going to sand them a bit to clean them up. This belt grinder is my most used machine tool. I have really been enjoying this C Corp super glue. It is so nice, it's strong, it's fast to cure. And here we are at the pantograph. This pantograph is about 45 years old. It is such a nice pantograph. So a pantograph is a ratio copy milling machine. So with my right hand, I am tracing around the template. And on the left side, you can see I was milling out the part. Look how that goes around perfectly. So let's pop these off. So we're taking off the dice now. And I made this little clear template, which will help me line up where the dice are going to all be. First finding where the center dice will be, and then making some other measurements where we're going to have the other dice. It's going to be 5 dice in a full house arrangement. So full house is 3 the same and 2 the same. The way we're going to line up these dice is as if they have been randomly tossed. There they are lined up. So now using the female template, we are going to be milling out the pockets in the ebony. Let's give this a try fit. I got a little ball in the bottom of the hole so I don't push it all the way in. Let's see if the ivory goes in. Make sure you line it up. Perfect. Perfect. Now we can do it to the other 4. So here they are all lined up. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Each one has a little ball in the bottom so that I can pull them out. So once I push them in, they are stuck. But just to make sure that they never ever will come out, I'll be super gluing these dice in there. That's one. Let's push it in all the way. Perfect. Let's do it to these other ones now. Perfect. Now we're going to just sand the surface. Clean up all the glue that kind of oozed out. Look at this. Looks so flat yet. Now before we continue with the handle, we are first going to work on the tang nut. This is a 1927 South Bend 9C lathe. It's almost 100 years old, and it is just simply magnificent. Here we made the nut. We have a little kitty that likes to be with me in the shop. His name is Kit. That's what the kids named him. He sometimes gets a little in the way, but that's alright. He's my little friend. Now we've marked out the shape of the handle. Now it's time to grind it to shape. Again, using the belt grinder. As you can see, I've used the belt grinder a lot. Rad Dugam on Facebook. He lives in Brampton, Canada. You should really see if you can get one of these grinders. They are just bomb-proof. I've put thousands of hours on this grinder, and it's still in almost new condition. Now we're using the orbital sander. I find that sander is just so nice to use on handles. And then we're going to do some hand sanding. Hardwoods like this hand sand very easily. Over here I'm doing what's called a shoe shine method. So I got a strip and I'm just shoe shining, as it were, the whole handle. And then using some very fine 2000 grit sandpaper, I'm just sanding linearly. Remember, linear lines is how the eye likes to follow the direction of the knife. Look at that, just beautiful. Alright, now we're going to work on the spacers and the guard. So we're putting a groove in the two thick spacers. That's done on the small wheel. And then that groove is cleaned up on this Scotch-Brite wheel. Then we're going to put a slight dome on the thin spacers. And we will do the same dome on the guard. So let's buff these pieces. Again, on the buffing attachment on my belt grinder. It's just absolutely fantastic. Look how shiny that is. Alright, now for our next step of the handle. I know there's been lots of steps. I'm going to use these Sheffield domed pins. There's the flowers again. I got these domed pins from the unbelievably skilled knife maker Ron Newton, and he had acquired them in some old shop once. They are nickel silver, and they're really small, so they will be the perfect addition to this knife. Now, knives of this era often had these kind of pins, so it's a nice throwback to the time of studded knife handles. It's quite easy to lay out all the pin placements under the microscope because you can see it so very well. Here I am drilling all the holes. 2 5s and 3 3s, a full house. Now we're going to put a tiny little bevel almost like a rounded edge on the very front of the handle. So we draw that on with the pencil and just sand away all the pencil. There was a little kit again, scrounging around. Quite a contented kitty. There, nice little rounded edge on the very front of the handle. Going to give that a good polish again. And then we're going to countersink these holes just a little bit. And then I'm going to glue these pins into the holes. Now I suck at these very small things, so my wife was super helpful to glue these little pins in. Now using some acetone, just cleaning up the last little bit of spilled glue. And let's give these pins a really nice polish. Again, the pins are nickel silver. Probably 170 years old. Now let's finish that nut. The first thing I like to do is I'll drill the tool hole. This little hole will allow the takedown tool to unscrew this nut. Then we shape the end. A little bit of files, sandpaper. Alright, we're going to slide this together now, finally. And we're going to work on the sheath now. All my leather sheaths are made by Buffalo Bones Leather in Waterloo, Ontario, Canada, and he does the best job with leather sheaths. However, for the metal sheaths, I'm stuck having to do them on my own, which I don't mind. Making a metal sheath is quite fun. I'm going to just trace out the size. Cut this out on my bandsaw. We're just going to clean this up on the Scotch-Brite wheel, just to make it a little bit clean and tidy. And that thick piece underneath the sheet metal, that's my sheath form. So I will form the sheet metal, the stainless sheet metal, around that form. Every time make sure you line it up perfectly. And then tap her in place. Just keep tapping, keep working, especially that tip. You have to go back and forth on it. Now that we have so much excess material on here, we're just going to make a little marker line and remove that material. We don't need that material, but when you start forming, it's nice to have a bit extra. Let's grind that down. Back to forming. See how nice that tip looks? Now we're going to surface grind the meeting parts so that it's nice and flat together. Look how nicely they meet up. We're putting our Kent twist clamps on here. We're going to TIG weld the entire perimeter. I'm not adding any filler metal, just doing a fusion TIG. Seamless. Let's do the other side. Now at this point, the sheath is too long, so we're just going to make a mark on the tang. That'll tell us how much too long it is. We'll cut that off right there. The sheath material is 50 thousandths of an inch. It is 410 stainless steel. Let's clean up the entire perimeter. Now what you can see me doing is I'm dipping it in water the entire time. If you don't do that, your sheet metal will warp. Then begins the hand sanding. Sand out all the machine scratches. Here again we're using a file guide from Nordic Edge. Just the best in the business because they have the screw-on carbides. Milling the shoulder, and then we file. And then we hand sand. And we're going to drill where our sheath button is going to be. So starting out with a very small drill bit. Then we're going to move up to a number 29 drill bit. This is the perfect drill bit for an 8x32 thread. And being that it's 50 thousandths of an inch thick, that means there's 1.5 threads in every spot around that hole. So that's plenty for the nut to hold on to. Here we are working on the nut. Boom, there she is. And now again, we're going to use the same style of engraving as that Sheath had in that video from the Knife magazine on YouTube. Once again, we're just laying out the lines. Here I cut the backbone already. And here we did some filling in. And then finally, all the shading. Now we gotta work on the throat piece. We're using some 416 stainless. We're going to cut that out. Surface grind that little piece. And we're going to mill that slot. This is why when you're making your form for your sheath, just to plan in those radii, get that perfect fit. That blade fits just perfectly in there. I have to press that throat piece on, so it's really stuck on there. But at this point, we're going to do some rounding off, and we're going to apply ink into all of the engraving. I really like this paint. It's like a ceramic paint. We are so close to completing this now. Always feels great, this part. Wiping off the surface. And then we're going to use some genuine velvet that my wife found. And it's going to go inside the sheath. So gluing that onto some hard poster board, cardboard material. Gonna let that glue, gonna let that sit, and then we're going to slide this in here. So I'm not going to glue this piece in like I have in previous pieces, but it's just going to slide in, and then friction's going to hold it in place. Just like that. Trim the top off there, nice and square. This is just a nice soft pillow for the blade. Look at that fit. Beautiful. Let's polish that blade there nice and good, nice and clean. So clean you can see how dirty I am. And then the throat piece, we're going to super glue on. Again, I said I had to press this on. It was such a perfect tolerance fit. So I'm using this little hand pump hydraulic press to press on that throat piece. Make sure you wipe off all the excess glue now. Here we have all the parts. 12 loose parts here. And at this point, I'm going to be putting on some gloves. There's such a shine on the blade and on the sheath that if I don't wear gloves, it's just going to be putting all my schmutz on everything. All goes together perfectly. Tighten that nut. The final inspection. Let's slide it into the sheath. Perfect. Sheath doesn't come off. Here was our drawing, and here's our knife. We stayed pretty true to the original. Thank you so much for watching. We're going to take this outside. It's a beautiful winter day, and I want you just to enjoy this for a minute. That was so nice. Thank you so much for watching. This was such a fun piece to make. I really appreciate all the comments and the nice things you guys have to say. If you have any questions, please leave them in the comments below. Take care now, and I really do appreciate you all staying with me and watching me make my knives. All the best.